It's not a boy. Chapter 3. Our Farm. Part 1. Sunnyside had to change to keep up with the times, and so did our farm. While I was trying to get another thing on my what I'm good at list, my dad and his brother Uncle Sid, who lived next door with Grandma and his family, were trying to change things for the better on our farm. But sometimes when things change, there are problems that have to be sorted. One problem that happened before I was born, my dad told me about. This is the story that he said when I went with him to collect our cows from Bottom Field so that they could be milked. One day, Dad bought a cart horse from a dealer in Ringham. She was a lovely red-coloured cart horse, and she looked fine and well. She had a shiny mane and strong muscles. But when Dad coupled her to a cart, they found out that she wasn't all she seemed. In fact, she turned out to be no use at all. "She's going backwards," shouted Uncle Sid, giving their new horse a smack on her backside with his strong hand. "Walk on," shouted Dad, getting worried. But the horse kept on taking its slow, heavy steps backwards. It was in the wrong direction. Dad had brought this horse to bring the hay in, and that was turning out to be a problem. She was fine when she wasn't coupled to the cart, but as soon as she was in the shafts, she went backwards. "Whoa!" shouted Dad. "Walk on, not back!" But the whites of her eyes showed, and she walked back. The sun shone from a blue sky, but our barometer was pointing to change, and that meant that we would have to hurry getting the hay in. The storm was coming over the Humber. Big black clouds were boiling up. The hay would be spoiled if it rained, and they were relying on that new horse, but still it walked backwards. My dad had given a big cheque to the dealer for that horse, and now she would not walk forwards in the cart. They tried putting everything, oats in front of her, smacking her on the backside, shouting and calling, but nothing worked. That horse would not pull a cart, and that was the end of that. I bet my dad's face was as black as that thundercloud coming over the Humber as he sweated over that horse. "Walk on, you daft beggar!" he shouted again, but he wasn't getting anywhere. Then Uncle Sid suddenly saw that they were going about things the wrong way, and he shouted, "We've got to stop that cheque!" My dad did not know about things like that, but Uncle Sid did because he read the newspapers from Hull and he knew what to do. There was no time to lose. They rushed off to their bank in Ringham, and they were only just in time. The money would have gone out of their bank that night, and the local horse dealer would have cashed it, and that would have been the end of that. It would have been very difficult indeed. You see, when they took the horse back to the horse dealer, he said that he had never had any trouble with it before, and that it was a perfectly good horse. But she was no good to us. Anyway, Dad and Uncle Sid had their money back, and the horse dealer had his horse back, and there was nothing more to be said. They hurried home to the hay that was still in the field, and they had to get that hay in somehow, so they went to collect Dobbin. Dobbin was our old horse, and he was in retirement. He couldn't work too hard. He was too old and too weak, and he had been put out to grass. He lived in a field called horse pasture. My man said we should say horse pasture, but we never did. And my dad put reins on Dobbin and fastened him to the cart shafts and shouted, "Walk on!" And Dobbin knew what to do. He plodded slowly down our lane. But he couldn't hurry. He had to take his time, being old. And he stopped at the side of the road for some grass. And that was no good at all. And of course the storm came and they didn't get all the hay in. And this made Dad think, because he was trying to change our farm for the better. And then he found that horse that walked backwards, and it was a red herring. My dad said that a red herring is something that's no use, even though you might think at first that it is. So that was the end of Dad's story about the horse that walked backwards. Uncle Sid knew how to take the farm forwards. He knew how to change things for the better, and he bought our first tractor. It was bright red, even brighter than the horse that walked backwards. He called it Red Herring for a bit of a joke, because that horse was a joke. And in fact, horses on farms were all red herrings now that we had changed to tractors. Soon they heard that the Ringham horse dealer had gone out of business because nobody wanted horses anymore. They all wanted tractors on their farms. Everything was changing for the better. It was the same in our milking shed. Everything was being updated. Dad had built up a big herd of cows, and it would take far too long to milk them by hand, so we had our old cowshed modernised and the latest milking machinery installed. Every day Dad went down to Bottom Field to fetch our cows, where they had been eating grass all day. They were waiting at the gate, and when he opened it, they rushed up our lane, making a black mist of dust and flies, just like that thundercloud moving steadily nearer. And then you could hear them mooing and gathering speed till they were all in our yard waiting to be milked. Our cowshed had been scrubbed clean to get rid of all the germs and was ready and waiting. My dad was always worried about germs getting into the herd or the milk. We relied on the milk check from the dairy, and the herd had to be clear of illnesses and the milk had to be pure. "Come on, you daft beggars," shouted Dad, and he slapped the cows' backsides, and they rushed into their stalls. He often called animals "you daft beggars," but he didn't mean it, except, of course, that horse that walked backwards. My favourite cow was one that was called Daisy. They all had to have names nowadays. The black and white pattern of every cow had to be drawn on a postcard and sent to the people in charge down south, and they registered it for our pedigree herd. They even told us what letter the name had to begin with. Daisy's year was D, of course, and there was Doris and Dolores as well. Every year it's the next letter. I liked Daisy because she was easy to spot with her pattern a bit like a daisy on her forehead. I watched while the cows were tied up with a chain round their necks, ready for milking, and I could already hear the panting and pulsing of the milking machine, impatient to get on with its job. But first our cows had to be sprayed. My dad sprayed their tails to get rid of the flies. Bluebottles and all sorts of insects sat on muck full of germs, then came crashing into our milking shed, buzzing and banging into the windows, and then landing on our cows and in our milk if we were not careful. But we were careful. We were very careful. Every place where germs could be was scrubbed, and every fly that could be seen was sprayed. After milking, all the frothy milk was heaved off in shiny buckets, then poured through a thick filter and then into our sterilised milk cans. On went the lid, and these cans were lifted outside onto our milk stand to wait for the lorry to take them to the dairy. Then we would get a regular cheque in the post brought by Posty, our postman. So long as we kept on getting plenty of milk from the cows, we got our big milk cheque. The more milk we had, the bigger the cheque. And to get more milk, we had to have a bowl.